to our third, and can you believe it, final day of Entrepreneurship Immersion Week. My name is not Chang Han, my name is Sean Lum, and I'm the Interim Managing Director of Entrepreneurship at UBC. I'm joined by my colleague and co-MC, EIR Head of Growth Strategy at UBC, Michelle Sklar.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. Greatly appreciate you making the trek, whether it was across campus or across the city. We've certainly had an incredible couple of days. Of course, before we launch into things, we would just like to begin with our land acknowledgement, which I think there we go, wonderful. So, acknowledging that the land that we gather on is a traditional, ancestral, and wonderful. And then lots of folks that are joining us today for the first time. Yeah, well, you're in for a treat, for sure. Our conference this year is focused on the intersection of the climate crisis and human health. Recognizing that the climate crisis that we're in is probably the single largest human health crisis that we've seen in centuries. And so we've had many important conversations over the last couple of days that have tackled all different issues that really have had us look at systems changes and new approaches. We've heard some from amazing entrepreneurs, and for those of you that may have joined us yesterday, we had our regional ecosystem showcase, and so we had 10 companies from across the province that shared their incredible transformational solutions impacting human health and climate. And we got a really awesome lineup today. So I don't know if you've got any comments that you wanted to share from your observations yesterday, Sean.
Yeah, I think what was really inspiring was some of the themes that emerged yesterday. And we've heard this many times before, but it's breaking down the silos, and we can't treat human health crises and climate crises and social injustices or social justice issues independently, but they're interconnected. And in particular, one thing that really stuck out for me was during one of the panels that included Professor Alison Shaw from SFU's Climate Hub, and I learned a new term yesterday that I thought was really exciting and inspiring, which is co-creation, research, and translation. And so bringing all of the constituents and stakeholders and rights holders around the table to solve for these really tough problems that we're facing. And so I'm really excited for the future to participate in that sort of co-creation activity. So
awesome. Actually, another really great term that was new for me was total addressable impact. And yes. So for anyone here that is exploring entrepreneurship, we often talk about total addressable market, but we had a great theme around a total addressable impact. So that definitely stood out.
Yeah, that did, absolutely. Now, where are we in the agenda? Of course. So very excited to kick off today's agenda with our morning fireside chat with Dr. Veronique Lecault, on helping solve critical human health issues of today, and also explore some of the global trends that Obselva is seeing at the intersection of human health and climate. Don't forget, you can direct your questions to our speakers on Slido. We'll put up a QR code, or you can simply go to slido.com and use the code EIW23 and lodge your questions there, or pose your questions there. Without further ado, please welcome Veronique Lecault and Gail Murphy to the stage.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. It's great to be here with Veronique. It's always wonderful to have our Accelera friend.
It's always very special to come back here at UBC because this is where Accelera started. Background is in chemical engineering and biochemistry. Actually, did an undergrad degree at the University of Ottawa, and then I moved to UBC in 2006 to do my PhD. And I was in the Michael Smith lab right across the corner. And at the time, I was fortunate to be co-supervised by Dr. James Perret and Carl Hansen, who is CEO of Accelera, as some of you may know. And he was a professor at UBC at the time. And we were developing different technologies based on microfluidics to study single cells and understand biological questions. But leveraging these new technologies that were in development at the time. And then we thought, actually, if we look at the capabilities that we've built here, we might be able to use it to solve an important problem in the discovery of antibodies. And that's when we started Accelera, just over 10 years ago.
So did you always know you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or how did that part of it happen?
I wouldn't say that I knew that. Halfway throughout my PhD, I thought, I'm not sure that academia is for me, but I had like a lot of different interests. So I was interested in science communication. I was part of Let's Talk Science, and I thought maybe management consulting. I did like kind of the business aspect of things, but I didn't really know. But then it actually became clear that, well, with the work that I had been doing in the lab, then maybe there was an opportunity to then apply it to the real world. And that was really, really exciting. And so it's a privilege to have those types of opportunities. It doesn't come out very often. And so when it does, the decision was pretty easy to take the leap.
And so my understanding is you have some patents to your name and maybe some stories about a straw and cells. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of the early days of sort of moving this technology forward.
Oh, well, so we're in the business of discovering and developing medicines that can help patients, and a particular part of medicine that we call antibodies. And at the time, the technology that was developed at UBC was used to study hematopoietic stem cells, actually. And to test if you have a stem cell, you have to be able to recover it and do additional assays. And so it was really important to be able to recover those stem cells from the devices, which turned out to be a very important capability for antibody discovery as well. But at the time, we had not found a single antibody sequence. Now we're generating thousands every month, and so our recovery process was quite manual, and yeah, there may have been some mouth pipetting involved at the time with some filters. It was very safe, but it's just amazing how much progress we've done on the technology. Now it's all fully automated, much higher throughput, but you gotta start somewhere and do what needs to be done.
So what was sort of the time span of that, like from going where you were mouth pipetting to where you are now? Is that like 10 years, or is that 15 or 5?
Well, I mean, it's a constant evolution because we're continuing to invest in the technology at Accelera. But one thing that really happened that was quite impressive is, we were working individually on our projects in the lab as grad students, And I'm a bit embarrassed to say, but it took me 6 years to do my PhD. But then as soon as we assembled a core team of founders and then we started working together, the speed of the progress that was made was just so much more accelerated. And so that happened actually quite rapidly from the stage where, okay, we had this idea of bringing those different pieces of technology together to bringing it to a stage where we could start doing partnerships with our partners. So that was about a 2-3 year time frame to bring kind of from this idea to a first version that we could continue to build upon. But that all happened because you just had people working together, and it's amazing what happens once you have a team working towards a single goal.
It's always about the people, right? It always comes down to that. But you know, you did create a science-based venture, and sometimes these deep tech sort of ventures can be really hard because you have a technology, but it's hard to know what the business value is, right? What you're going to be able to raise money for, what you're going to be able to create product out of, how you're going to help people through getting your therapeutics through the regulatory bodies. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey of how you went from that discoveries in the lab to figuring out what the value was and how you're going to get people to invest in it?
Yeah, so a lot of that happened around 2012, 2013, so that was the early days of the company. And then we thought, okay, we have technologies that can help us discover antibodies, but antibodies can be used for different purposes. We can use them as reagents in labs, they are used in diagnostic, and it can also be used as therapies and medicines. And so we ask ourselves, like, how can we create the most value to the world with this technology? And when we asked that question, it became very clear that where we could provide the most value is in the space of therapeutic antibodies. And so actually we participated in the BC New Ventures competition, and that was actually a great venue to force us to kind of write our business plan, find the gaps, really think clearly about, okay, what is the opportunity ahead of us, and iron this out. And then once you put it on paper, you're like, actually, there is a path here, and it's worth pursuing it.
You make it sound so easy, but I don't think it's always so easy when you're in the trenches trying to do it. But Acceler was obviously maybe accelerated a bit because of the pandemic. If there's a good output of a pandemic, it's maybe allowing companies like Acceler to thrive. Can you tell us a little bit about how Acceler helped through the pandemic?
Yeah, so actually about 2 years before the pandemic, we had been adapting our platform to be able to respond in the case of a pandemic. So there was a program funded by DARPA, which is part of the US government, called the Pandemic Preparedness Platform, also called P3. And the goal at that time was to generate a medical countermeasure within 60 days of a viral threat. And I remember we were writing this proposal, actually, it was in this building. We were at Clove, and Carol's like, hey Vero, I need you to work on this budget volume for this proposal. I was like, okay, which was quite significant. And then you think about what that means. It sounded like science fiction to be able to go this fast and to put things in context. For many therapies, it takes about 10 years from discovery until it reaches patients in commercialization. A little bit earlier for early phase clinical trials, so a couple of years, but to do that in 60 days just sounded almost impossible. But what's important to note is that we had been preparing before the pandemic, so we adapted our platform. We had these drills, or called capability demonstration, where we would test, okay, how quickly can you do this? What are the failure points? What do we need to do better next time? And so in January 2020, when we received the call to learn that the first patient in North America had been diagnosed with COVID-19, we were ready to mobilize, and we would not have been ready if it wasn't from all of that preparation that we did before. And it's a bit of a parallel with entrepreneurship. You know, sometimes you really have to be prepared, and then when you see an opportunity where can you really have an impact, then it's important to go after it. And so we mobilized, and we're about 100 people at the time in the company. Received a sample from one of the first patients who had recovered from COVID-19, screened everything out of the sample with a single vial. You can imagine what was at stake. And 90 days later, we had found an antibody that could be advanced, and the first patient was dosed in human clinical trials. That was in partnership with Eli Lilly. But it was all hands on deck to be able to respond.
And so how long did that period look like, right? Because obviously we were seeing new variants, new changes, so this was kind of January, you leapt onto it. Mm-hmm. And then what did it look for the next year, 2 years? Because certainly the pandemic continues to last.
Yeah, the whole period is a bit of a blur. It went very, very quickly. But in the first few months, we're like, okay, we need to find the most potent antibody that has the highest likelihood of success. So that's what we did. And then bamlanivimab was the first antibody to receive emergency use authorization. But we didn't stop there, because we knew that viruses can mutate, and so we continued to monitor the variants, and then kept screening as well from different patient samples to find antibodies that would be more broadly cross-reactive and target regions that are less likely to be mutated. And so that's how bebtelovimab, which is the second antibody that we discovered, came in. So we were ready when the variants emerged to come with the next one.
And so if you look back over that period, I mean, hopefully we won't have that kind of pandemic event, but we'll have other health threats that appear. What did AbCellera learn during that period that is changing how you might approach the next health event that occurs?
Couple of things. I would say, it's really important to be prepared. There's a lot that we've learned during the pandemic, where we realized actually we don't really have the ability to manufacture our own medicines in Canada, and that's a gap for our country. And I think there's lots of initiatives now that we're seeing. There's the hub here at UBC, and there's other initiatives across Canada to fill this gap. But I would say that was one of the learnings, where actually we need to be able to discover, develop, and deliver and manufacture our medicines here in our country. And talking about preparation, if we don't exercise this ability, then we can't expect to be able to respond effectively in a pandemic. And what was really, really important was all of these relationships that we had built with collaborators earlier, where it was easy to turn it on and be like, okay, we need to move together and move fast. But if this is not in place already, and you don't have those networks and those relationships, it makes it very difficult to respond with the urgency that the situation requires. Which comes to the second learning, which is, when you have people who work together towards the same goal, and we all put our minds to it, things can happen much more rapidly. And so we have to look at these challenges with the sense of urgency that they deserve.
Yeah, it always comes down to those networks and making sure they're in place well before you actually have those crises to deal with. Now, you ended up in kind of an interesting path, right? You started as more of a science engineer, and now you're COO. So what did that path look like, and what's kind of a typical day as a COO for you?
every day is different. Yeah, and it really happened just organically, to be honest. At some point we had our first 2 employees in Accelera as a company. It's like, okay, well, we need to set up payroll and someone to do it. And so my mom is in accounting, so I called my mom and asked her, okay, how do I do that? How do I set up QuickBooks? Yeah, so I guess my role has evolved and changed over the years, but at the end of the day is seeing what needs to be done, what does the company need, and how can I contribute? And with that mindset, I've been fortunate because I've learned so much on all different aspects of our business. So it's been a really fun journey.
Well, I'm sure we have some students with us today or maybe on the live stream, and you came from more of a academic research, doing grad studies. What did you learn from that experience that you think is helping you today as a COO?
Yeah, if I think about most of the things that have been really, really useful, it's not always the things that I've learned in classes. It's often about some of the extracurricular activities where you learn to work as a team, you learn to work with others, you create things in different ways, and yeah, I think that's kind of a learning that became actually quite obvious even early on in the companies, where we realized, and credit to Carl, that like for us to be successful, we had to invest as much in developing our people than in developing the technology. And we've had that mindset from the very beginning. We had what we call the Junto Club, which was inspired by Benjamin Franklin, and we would meet monthly, just sharing some ideas on personal growth and development, yeah, so that's something that is really continues to be alive at Accelera, where we invest a lot in developing our people, and yeah, I think a lot of those skills can be learned at university, but more broadly, not always only in courses.
Yeah, no, that's fair, but certainly, obviously, you learned a lot of communication skills as well. But you talked about culture a bit, right? And maybe you can tell people that aren't as familiar with Accelera, what's the growth been like in terms of people? And how have you tried to nurture culture as that growth happens? Because it's been pretty spectacular growth, which can be hard.
Yeah, we started as a group of 6 people, and now are over 600. So it's been quite rapid growth over the past decade. And at the beginning, I would say that, well, when we talk about culture, it's something that you have to live and breathe. And what makes it is really all of the individual interactions. And so there was a certain culture that happened organically early on, and at the beginning it's kind of hard to define, and that works okay until a certain size, but then at some point we're like, okay, we're in a very special place. Let's just have such an amazing group of people. We care for each other. There's that grit and resilience. Like, so how do we define that? And then we went through this exercise of really ironing out our values and what it meant. And when we think about values for a company, it's not something you put on the wall and say, okay, now we have values. It's something that you have to live and breathe every day, and it can really be a guide that can help you make those decisions. So the way we look at it actually is our values are what we have in common, and the culture is actually, well, everyone adds to the culture. So every time you add a new person to the team, they bring their own experiences, their own perspective, and the culture itself can evolve or can also be a bit different depending on the teams, and we embrace that. But what we do have in common are these values.
And so what size is Accelera now in terms of number of employees?
Just about 600 people now.
And I think you've met every one of them, right? As
Almost,
almost in just a few. And how much is the growth looking like from here on?
So in the past decade, we really built capabilities to go from target to, I would say, antibody candidates that could be turned into medicines. Now we're entering a new phase where we're building the capabilities for the last step for antibodies to be able to reach patients. And so most of our growth is in building those new capabilities, so to be able to translate those new antibodies into next-gen therapies. So we are building a clinical manufacturing facility here in Vancouver. So for that, there's engineers that we're looking for. Also starting to build networks for clinical trials to bring those medicines to patients. And so there's kind of different types of skills that we're looking for as we continue to grow.
Yeah, it's certainly a really impressive campus that you're building. So it must be pretty exciting to see the building taking shape and those new capabilities coming online. And I'll remind people that you can put some questions in because we'll be able to go to some questions from the audience soon. Maybe I'll ask this one before checking for questions from the audience. If you think back, what skill?
I am, and so if you put me in a large group of people, sometimes I have lots of thoughts, but it's hard to bring them out. And I think over the years I realized that actually it was worth putting those different ideas out, and also listening to, and there's many others in similar situations. So creating that space for those ideas where perhaps some people may not be as vocal, but those ideas are equally important. And so that's something I'm still working on, like to speak out when I have some of these ideas, some intuition, and also trying to be really mindful to create that space for those different opinions and ideas to emerge.
All indications that you must have a great culture at Accelera. We do have some questions on Slido, so here we go. How have you navigated transitioning from science, ideas, and products to actually managing a business, teams, investors, and a budget?
Well, I have an engineering background, so actually a lot of it is kind of optimizing, troubleshooting, problem solving. So there's a lot of that in finance as well, and numbers, and so actually these skills are quite transferable. There's a numbers of other more soft skills that I think you learn in life in general. So, but it's really about keeping an open mind and a learning mindset, and it's it's okay to not have the answer. But when we work as a team, there's many situations like, okay, we've never done that before. How do we tackle it? And then you bring some people together, and then we figure it out. And then next time around, we know how to do it.
But never the same problem twice, right?
Some of them come in recur in different flavors, but it's always a bit different, right? Because you always need to, especially in entrepreneurship, you always need to look at your environment and adapt to it. We're essentially asking ourselves, how can we create the most value to the world? And the world around us is evolving, and we have to be evolving with it. So you can never be in a status quo, especially in technology, because you continually have to rethink how you're doing things and invest in technologies to set a cutting edge.
So here's a question about funding, right? Because in many ways, Accelera has sort of hit the dream, right? You've gotten the investors to see the value, to see the vision, and come to you with the ability to raise the capital to do what you want to do next. But with that comes some pressure. So how have you handled the pressure that comes with it?
Well, we've always looked at, so we bootstrapped this company, first of all, and we're really lucky to have an environment in Canada and BC where there's lots of programs to help companies starting up. like that mindset of thinking, how do we deploy our capital as efficiently as possible, as if it was our own funds? It's something that we continue, like we always ask ourselves, and yes, we were fortunate to raise some capital, but that didn't come early on. We only raised $1 million and didn't have to raise institutional capital until much later. And what that allowed us to do is really to grow organically, put our resources in those ideas that we thought were the most valuable, stay disciplined. And this mindset is one that, it doesn't matter how much you've been raising, that's one that is always important to keep in mind for any business.
Yeah, sometimes it's great when you can grow it the way you want to grow it, and then establish that culture before the other pressures might appear. So the next question is kind of about what you're using that capital for in part, because Accelera has started to invest in startup companies, so what does that look like going forward? And especially maybe for the local ecosystem here in Vancouver.
So you might be referring to our partnership with Abdera, which is a local company, and so really we're in the business of partnering, and how these partnerships look like. Well, it can differ, but our mindset is when our partner wins, we can win, and so we're always approaching from the angle of, okay, how can we build the most value together? And for an early stage company, capital may be more limited, but we're able to bring our technology, and that company may have really good ideas on a new therapeutic target or modality. And so how do we align with our partners so that we're all having the success of those molecules in mind, and that's how we look at it. So that's a partnership we're really proud of. That's a local company, and it also shows the value of building this ecosystem, of building these relationships. If you think about some of the hubs, biotech hubs, it started with a few anchor companies, and then through those partnerships, that's how we can really create a strong ecosystem.
And so maybe for those people who aren't as familiar with Accelera, I have heard Carl talk about it as a platform company as opposed to a product company. Is there an evolution going on in that way, or do you still consider it a platform company?
Well, if you think about our mission, it is to bring better medicines to patients. And how do you do that? And one would be able to do that at scale, able to maximize the impact. And we've been doing this by investing in technologies that then allow us to move many of those programs forward. And so they're really, you need to invest in the technologies, you need to stay at the cutting edge. The problems are becoming harder and harder. You don't have really any low-hanging fruits in terms of target to look at. And so to be able to crack those, there are some significant technology investments that are required. But there is an evolution in the sense that now we are taking some of these antibodies much further than we used to, with the intention of bringing some into clinical trials. And that was a project that was announced with the Government of Canada and the Government of BC recently this year.
So a bit of an evolution going on too. So this might be a hard question. Okay, you get access to a time machine, and you get to go back, but only once, to one point in your past. And you can change anything you want at that point in the past. Where do you go and why?
That's a hard one. Okay, let me just think about this one a little bit. It's a hard one because we are where we are because of our past. And so, are there things that I would have done differently? Maybe, but it's amazing that all the little events, decisions, connections that had to happen to be where we are today were needed in the journey. And so, so I wouldn't put a point in time because I don't know where that would take us, but I can tell you that I'm very excited with where I am today.
Turned out well. So what role did UBC play in supporting Accelera in the early days beyond licensing IP?
Yeah, we've been fortunate to have a great relationship with UBC since the beginning, and there were actually lots of different synergies. So of course the technology was discovered at UBC. We were on campus for the first 5 years. There was also some research collaborations that we've had with UBC. Of course, great talent who have joined Accelera, and so yeah, there are lots of synergies, and there continues to be. As we build the economy that is based on innovation, we're working really closely with UBC to think about, okay, what are the skills that we're going to need in the future, and we're really grateful for those conversations and partnerships.
Well, it goes both ways, right? I think the university is also really happy to be able to engage and learn from what you need and make sure we're growing an ecosystem here in bio manufacturing with the life sciences that's really strong and one of the strongest in the world. Now here the questions keep moving around on me, so let me just try and figure this out. Here's another one. What's your vision for how Accelera can increase, improve, and expand the local entrepreneurial and investor ecosystem going forward, and on what time scale do you think that will happen?
Well, this can come in many ways, and we're only like a small piece of the equation, really, because we there's new ideas that can come from universities. We need entrepreneurs who take the lead to bring those ideas forward. We're always interested in hearing about good biology, good scientific ideas, and see how we may be able to work together on this. Another thing that has been actually really hard in our journey was finding lab space for our company. We're always at a stage where we needed to. Our labs we just didn't have enough space, and then we moved to the next building, and we thought, oh, we're gonna have space to grow, and then after 3 months later, we're already tight, and so that has been actually quite a challenge in our industry in Vancouver, and now we're getting ahead of that by building lab space, and we want to be able to keep it as lab space so that other emerging companies will have an easier path to follow and grow.
Yeah, I think it's finally being recognized more broadly that there is such a need for wet lab space for that sort of early stage startup. Now your business, as you've mentioned many times, has relied on extensive partnering, and that partnering paid off in many times, the pandemic being one of them. But what's been the strategy? What's Accelera's strategy to protect and grow your core intellectual property?
So we've always wanted to build a company that is based in Canada, and if often there are success stories where company that is great IP discovered in Canada, and then it gets bought by a U.S. European company, and this IP essentially leaves the country. So what's important is to be able to maintain this IP that creates value in our country, and that's something we're really committed to building an anchor company here in Canada.
Is there any particular strategy you use, really extensive patent protections or worldwide, or more trade secret? Can you say anything about kind of the details of the strategy?
It's always a combination of there are things that you choose to protect, with IP, there are other things that there's a lot of know-how that goes into making every step work, and not all of it can be protected from a patent perspective. And so one thing to really keep in mind though is, there's lots of new ideas, and so thinking early on as to, maybe there's something there, and we should file a provisional early. And so kind of always, sometimes as new ideas evolve, when you're in it, you don't always recognize how important it could become. So kind of always keeping that awareness, especially in an environment where we invest a lot in R&D, is really important.
And how do you push that through the company, right? Because you're hiring all these people. Many of them may not have been involved in IP strategies before, or knowing when a provisional might be there that you need. So how do you do that within the company to grow the awareness and kind of ensure that people are bringing the right ideas forward for potential projects?
Yeah, we have, so our kind of IP is part of our legal team, but we have really close relationships with some of those team members and our scientists. And so it's really about ensuring there's this constant dialogue and conversation. What are we working on? And then if someone has a new idea, like, let's check if to make sure that we can do this, or if not, do we need to license it? So it really comes down to building those strong connections between our scientists and our legal team who are focused on IP, so that, essentially that they're on the same team.
Sometimes that can be hard just to keep the speed going, right? So is there anything special you've had to do in terms of making sure the teams are the right size to allow those conversations to happen in a timely way?
Well, we do a lot of things to allow those conversations to happen, and I think it just comes down with we talked a little bit about the culture. So we're quite intentional in creating those opportunities for different members, different accelerates to connect, even if they're not necessarily working in the same function, because that's where a lot of those connections can happen. Or even when we have new accelerates joining, they start on the same day, and then so you have members from different teams who are building this, these connections from day one, and then can carry that as they, as they continue in the company. So so it's about being intentional to create those opportunities for teams to connect cross-functionally.
Now, Sean and Michelle were talking about terms they learned, and I think we just heard a new term, which is an accelerate. So how did you decide on how you actually refer to people who work at Accelerate?
It just happened. I don't know. I think there was just one email at some point that Carl sent years back referring to accelerates, and then it just stuck. That's what it is.
Always important to know that. Thoughts on vertical biotech integration, and does it lead to faster antibody development at Accelerate?
And I touched a little bit on that earlier. So essentially we're building capabilities to go from target to patients as quickly as possible. And often in larger organizations, there's lots of, you bring your molecule to that stage, and then you pass it on to the next team who takes it to the next stage, and then and then you have to transfer the knowledge. And so there's a lot of time that gets lost in these processes. And so the way we're building our capabilities is always thinking, but how can we, is there a way to bring forward decision or data so that we can use the data in that decision so that we're better informed later on, and that integration across teams is really, really important as we think about these programs coming through. So again, it comes down to being really intentional and not building silos and functions that do their own thing, but always thinking, but if we're building it that way, is it going to make it more efficient as a whole when we look at the big picture. So it's really important to keep that mindset.
Sounds like that's the engineer in you coming through a little bit about optimizing the process, but not so easy when you're growing at the rate that Accelera is growing. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the early years of Accelera, that the market seemed slow to validate your hypothesis for commercialization. We talked a little bit about this, but there is another question about it. What was that turning point? When did it start feeling easier? Or has it started to feel easier?
Yeah, I think if you're an entrepreneur, it's never easy. If it starts feeling easy, it's because you've stopped thinking as to what you need to get to the next stage. But I would say there was I think a real risk early on in terms of the technology. Like we had not found a single antibody, and so I actually still remember that moment. We were in the NCE lab. It was about like 2 a.m. in the morning. We had started the experiment early, and we're all waiting around the computer to know if we would see a hit. So that would be like an image that shows a cell that makes an antibody, and at that time it was against the flu virus. And that was the first time we're putting all these ideas together, and we're not sure like if it would work or not. And then there was this one hit, like a single one. But that was the difference between like an idea that would just die on the vine or something that we could build on. So I would say that was like early on quite a pivotal moment where there was a lot of uncertainty in the technology, but getting that first proof of concept really meant that if we kept at it, then we would be able to build something.
And so when you were starting out at the beginning, you talked about the fact you had taken sort of $1 million. What did it look like to be able to start generating some profit or using other grants to be able to get to the scale when you took the large institutional investments?
Well, I think what it allowed us to do early on is actually to keep control of the fate of our company. So as soon as you raise capital from institutional investors, the clock starts, where at some point they will be looking for an exit. And so our first seed round was friends and family, and then we were able to get help from many of the government programs. And what that allowed us to do is really position this company to stay in Canada while keeping that control, and that was critical.
So clearly you're not a startup anymore. Where do you sort of consider yourself on the journey between startup and anchor company?
It might be adolescence, because in the way that we work, we still have a lot of the startup mindset where you have to see what needs to get done, figure it out, see how to get there as efficiently as possible. And then on the other side, well, as you grow, then you have to start thinking, okay, but how does the information flow? Because it's not as simple as getting in an office together and where everyone knows what's going on. And so there are those other things that we have to be mindful of to make sure that we can remain efficient. But I would say that mindset of grit, doing what needs to be done, not being afraid of rolling up your sleeves, that's something that we've kept.
Well, thank you so much for coming and doing this fireside chat, and I think you're an inspiration to all of us, and Accelera certainly is an amazing company to have within Vancouver, and UBC is proud to have been even a bit of a part of that. So thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
That mic doesn't work.
Bring it up. Thank you, Gail and Brownie. Amazing. Now, I hope you're ready to hear from our next major UBC spinoff company. With a partnership with Novo Nordisk for a deal valued at 2.67 billion with the B USD. I think that's 5 billion Canadian. In this session, co-founder and CEO Tamer Mohammed will share his experience for high impact, starting right here in British Columbia. Please join me in welcoming Tamer Mohammed to the stage, founder and CEO of Aspect Biosystems. With him and moderating the session will be Justin Young, partner of emerging and high growth companies at Osler. This session is presented to you by Osler, and we are so grateful for their support. Tamer and Justin, come on up.
Good morning.
Good morning, Justin.
All right, good morning, everybody. So I'm going to hope that I make it through today without coughing directly into the microphone. I was sick a few weeks ago, and I just can't kick the cough. So hopefully Tamer does most of the talking. So just wanted to start with a brief introduction for everybody. Just me quickly, I'm a founding partner of the Vancouver office of Osler. Got a couple of my colleagues, Riley and Martin, in the room today. We're one of the oldest and largest law firms in Canada, but we also, importantly for today, have the leading tech practice. So we work with thousands of startups across the country. We do hundreds of deals a year, usually in the $5 to $8 billion worth of ventures. So we see a lot of financing, a lot of tech M&A. And we have a great opportunity across the country to work with companies like Aspect and founders like Tamer. And I've had a long history with UBC as well, right from inception, and we've met great companies here, great ecosystem partners, so we're really excited to be here. So that's me, but we're here to hear from Tamer. So I'm going to embarrass you with a brief intro. So Tamer is a bioengineer, an inventor, and an entrepreneur. He's obviously, as Shang just mentioned, the CEO of Aspect Biosystems. So Tamer co-founded Aspect in 2013, and under his leadership, they've secured earlier this year, they built a world-class team. Tamer is a leader in the field of regenerative medicine. He speaks at venues like TEDx and other conferences, sessions like today. He has a whole litany of awards and recognitions, which I won't spin through all of them because there's too many. But he's a real leader in regenerative med and in the ecosystem here, not only in BC, but the bio ecosystem, frankly, across North America. Tamer holds a BASc in biomedical engineering and an MASc in electrical computer engineering from UBC. And importantly to me, Tamer's been a client and a good friend for a decade. So I'm super excited to be here today to talk to you.
Really excited, and I have to comment on your amazing Aspect socks. Of course, I didn't get the memo, and so I'm not wearing those. But if anybody here joins Aspect, you'll get Aspect socks as well. So.
My shout out. I thought the T-shirt would be too much, so I went with the socks. So Tamer, this is a very unique session for me because I'm not used to sitting and having a fireside with someone who 10 years ago was probably sitting in one of these chairs downstairs as a UBC student in a lab working on tech that for some reason you guys decided to commercialize. And it's been an amazing 10-year journey. So I think for the room, that's a unique thing to talk about, and I'd love to have you talk about the origin story. How did you go from the lab for Professor Conrad Wallace to where you're sitting today, and maybe talk a little bit about that?
No, absolutely. You're right. It feels like yesterday where I was sitting in the audience, and so that's hopefully one message that I could emphasize today is the distance between where you're sitting and being here on stage to describe success stories actually isn't as large as you may think. Even though at the time I thought it was very, very large. And so going back to sort of my time at UBC, it really starts with being involved with awesome people. So at that aspect, we have 4 co-founders: myself, Conrad Wallace, Simon Bayer, and Sam Wadsworth. 3 of us are engineers, and Sam is our lone biologist. And before I get into sort of the key ingredients on maybe the technical side that was essential to our growth, I think first and foremost, we just really enjoy working with each other. Until this day, it's built on a foundation of trust, a foundation of respect for one another, and wanting to work with one another and to go the distance together. And so when I was looking at sort of joining a project and working on something for the next big chapter in my career, what really gravitated me towards that opportunity was a team. And so that was step one, is the team, and I can't emphasize that enough. Going back to sort of my training, so I'm an engineer at heart, and my training was in electrical and computer engineering in my undergraduate studies, and it was near the end of my engineering degree that I really got fascinated with the world of biology, and the whole concept or idea that you could create dynamic bioengineered systems rather than just using ones and zeros to create computer systems, or resistors and capacitors to create electrical systems. Blew my mind away, and so that's what took me into sort of the bio world. And then the next big aha moment was, okay, well, now that we've developed amazing technology, how do we deliver this to people? And that's really where entrepreneurship came into play. And so that's where I started attending sessions like the one that we're here gathered here today to listen to and participate in, and learning about how do we deliver this to people, because that's the beauty of entrepreneurship and commerce, is that's the vehicle to deliver value to people. And other than that, it's really just ideas, and it's research, and it's science, which has its role, of course. It's a prerequisite, but ultimately the beauty about entrepreneurship is persevering and figuring out how to get this to people. So that was our next big step, and of course, UBC played an instrumental role there in telling us simple things like get out of the building and go talk to people, which was like a blow your mind type of a thing as a scientist within a lab coat with glasses on and looking at the microscope and going to talk to another human being. It was a very frightening thing. And so those simple things were essential, and so that's the story of kind of how I evolved from engineering to biology to entrepreneurship, and having an amazing team has been instrumental to our growth.
So, and I'm going to get you to talk through some of the big moments, but I was thinking this morning about the theme of the week, right, which is dealing with these massive global crises and climate change, human health, like really big problems that we need deep tech to solve. A lot of our clients that are building B2B, B2C software solutions, etc., they have mission-driven sometimes, they have great businesses, but the problems are usually not massive in scale. The market opportunity is massive in scale, but not necessarily the problem. I love the expression, and I can say this as a vegetarian. I used to have people say, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? But when you thought about it as the 4 of you thinking, we're gonna commercialize this tech, you were solving a problem that must have felt like an elephant. How did you think, how are we gonna get from here to potentially solving these human health diseases through our therapeutic? Did you think about it in that grand scale, or did you have to break it down and just sort of tackle one stage at a time?
Yeah, I think one great trait that you'll find in many sort of aspiring entrepreneurs is they have sort of almost a naiveness or innocence to them in the sense that they think that they could change the world. And I think that's important. If somebody would have told me how hard this was as a graduate student, I'd be like, all right, I'm gonna go this other way, and good luck to you. And so it's actually, I don't think it's actually constructive to actually say how hard it is or to go into the details of it, because everybody has to figure it out, and my goal here isn't to sort of scare and say how hard it is, but so I think that's important. Number one is I would say you have to have that sense of anything is possible. We could do anything. Of course, you have to have a clear vision, and you will figure it out, and you have to break it down to what are your hypotheses, and go out and try to validate or figure out if you need to refine. So you always have to have that kind of mindset. And I think the beauty of sort of scientific or technical entrepreneurs is they think that way naturally. And so if you could apply that mindset in the business world, and instead of setting a hypothesis for your scientific experiment, well, you could set a hypothesis for your business. I'm going to go speak to X number of customers or partners or different investors, and I'm going to come back and take that feedback and refine. And if what you're trying to pursue after many attempts of refinement is still not an opportunity, then I think as a scientist and a technical trained person, you would probably surrender to that logic. But I think it's important to have that sort of naiveness that comes with being an entrepreneur and think you could do anything and anything is possible. And I also think founders are really well positioned for leading these types of world-changing type organizations, because they have a lot of that and they have that passion. And so universities are already uniquely positioned to launch companies like Accelera and companies like Aspect. Our companies couldn't have been founded out of garages, like many of the stories you hear out of the Silicon Valley, like Facebook and whatnot. And so we needed to be sort of incubated and have access to infrastructure here at the university. And within the university, there are many of these future founding CEOs and leaders of these companies. So I think we need to nourish them and support them and not break that sense of anything is possible in them. And I think that's actually been an evolution in our ecosystem. I remember way back in the day, some of the early feedback we would get is you need to start growing up and you need to bring executives in suits, and so I think that's maybe something we're still refining and sanding out of our ecosystem here, just given our history maybe in the natural resources industry. But I think having a passionate founder-led organization to tackle some of these world-changing ideas and challenges that we're facing is critical, and I think universities are well positioned to create more and more of these.
So that's interesting. And when we started working together and incorporated your company, you weren't the CEO. And so I think what I often see in projects that are commercialized at universities is the professor says, well, I'm going to be the CEO because it's my lab and it's my project. And then the team is built around that person, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But how did you guys get from that to the realization that you would be the CEO? I know that I've watched you give a presentation downstairs actually years ago, probably 9 years ago, and thought for the first time then, listening to you, Tamer could be the founder CEO of this business. But what was it about your founder team that allowed you guys to, one, look in, or can you talk about, did you look external? How did you end up internally thinking about leadership, and how did you manage to assume the roles you've assumed and do it in a way that's been so positive?
Yeah, so maybe just for some context, so again, there's 4 co-founders, myself, Simon, who are graduate students, researchers in Conrad Wallace's lab, and Conrad Wallace is a professor PI at the University of British Columbia here, and Sam was a postdoc at St. Paul's Hospital, so there was the 4 of us, and so what we did originally, as many people would naturally do, is mimic the sort of academic hierarchy. Kind of the most senior person is the CEO, and so on and so forth, and so that's what we did for the first 3 years from 2016 or from 2013 to 2016, and it was at that time that we needed to start thinking, okay, well, what's the vision, what's the strategy? The first 3 years we really weren't a company. We were in the lab refining kind of the technology, that type of thing, taking advantage of the infrastructure, the support here at UBC. And then we needed to really start about, okay, well, what's the strategy, what's the vision, how do we build a team, let's go raise money, let's look for partners. And so a lot of credit goes to Conrad for having the foresight to see things maybe in several of us as younger people on the team, seeing things in us that we didn't see in ourselves, actually. So I remember at the time we were thinking, well, maybe we should bring an external CEO. We almost surrendered to some of the pressure that we were getting. Oh, you need a gray hair, and we need somebody with a suit. And so we were actually.
To be clear, there's nothing wrong with gray hair.
No, I'm starting to get them, and I think the pace of that really accelerates once you have kids and have two of them at home. And so I would say so that we almost surrendered to that. I vividly remember a very, very long walk that I took with Conrad. It started at, so actually walks are a tradition at Aspect, so any meeting that could be a walk is a walk, and we go for long walks. And so that was a long walk. I think it was almost 16 hours, something crazy. We started at like 8 a.m. and we kept on going, and it was a hot summer day at UBC. We kept on going around Pacific Spirit Park and come back for lunch, And Conrad started the day saying, I think you really should be the CEO, and there's absolutely no way, it's not what I'm interested in. You should go talk to the others, go talk to Sam, go talk to Simon, we had an advisory group, and he kept on being persistent with it, and I said, okay, we'll take a couple of weeks, go talk to everybody. And then everybody came back and were like, yep, we want to do this. And so, wanting to, of course, not let the team down, took on that role, and that's how it all began. But it goes back to something I said at the beginning. I think we were all pragmatic. Everybody trusted each other. It wasn't about who's CEO and who's CSO and who's going to. It was just about how do we succeed here on our mission. And until this day, that's how we think, and that's of course had a big impact on our culture at Aspect. Because of course the founding team is foundational. But you're not going to get anywhere with just the founders, and so you have to start introducing other aspects of your culture and evolving the culture, and so that and building the tribe and the community to accomplish the mission. But that's the history.
So Conrad was obviously seeing something, and you turned out to be one of the most strategic CEOs that I've worked with in all the elements of what you do and all the facets of what you do. So it's obviously a skill set and a trait you had in you, but we have to talk about the deal you did with Novo. And obviously there's some things you can't share publicly, but it was an incredibly strategic deal with an incredibly strategic process. And for a company of Aspect size to go out and do a deal, which I think is maybe the largest preclinical deal in history, at least in Canada, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but to go out and do a deal like that against a company of the size of Novo, and I say against, and it's a partnership, obviously it's collaboration, but there's a lot that goes into negotiating a transaction like that. So I'm sure everybody here would love to hear a bit about the backstory. How do you do a deal like that? How do you get to the point where you're even talking to the Novos of the world, and then how do you execute, and what were the key things you learned?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe just for some context, so Aspect's technology platform allows us to create a variety of implantable cellular based tissues to replace damaged organ function inside of the body, and so for the past several years we've been focused on creating a tissue therapeutic for the treatment of diabetes. So a tissue that could be implanted into the body that would have the cells necessary to sense glucose and release insulin, and not require immune suppression to do that critical biological job. And so for the past couple of years, we were working on this program and generating some really, really compelling data. So it all starts with the data. You can't walk into these pharmaceutical companies at the highest level and expect to get such a deal without really groundbreaking data. And so we presented that data at the last American Diabetes Association meeting last summer, and it created a huge buzz in the space. And that's also a big lesson here is know when to present your data, and sometimes presenting things too early when it isn't refined isn't good, but we waited for the right time and made a big bang, and it created an incredible buzz in the space. And a few months later, we ended up getting term sheet after term sheet, so we got a total of 3 term sheets from the biggest leaders in the diabetes space towards the end of the year, last year, and started an intense process of negotiating all the way up to speaking to the CEOs of these organizations, and these are people that are controlling probably the hottest disease segment on Wall Street right now, diabetes and obesity and metabolic diseases. And seen the stock price of Novo Nordisk and really soar to all-time highs. And so these are heavyweights that are also in a position of power and a position where they are really excited about the prospects of their business. And so we were, of course, working closely with Justin. Justin and I would speak till late in the evening and early in the morning. It was pulling 18-hour days, really nonstop, traveling all over the world. And we essentially took all of these partners, essentially a signature line. Like, so we went into definitive agreements with all three of them to ensure that we get the best possible term. And not just from an economics perspective, we actually didn't even end up taking the deal that had the largest economics, but we looked at a fit from a value-based perspective, from what they would bring to a partnership, who we think has the highest chance of success in terms of bringing this to patients. So we were, again, in a fortunate position, and the team worked incredibly hard. Both the team that, of course, did the amazing work to put us in a position where we had this extremely compelling data, but of course the deal group that was executing on this, and the support group around us from the world-class lawyers in the US and quarterbacked by Justin here in Canada on the general counseling side. So yeah, it was an extremely awesome process, and also sent a strong signal to the market, particularly the two others that didn't end up partnering with us, that we're honest negotiators, but even though we're Canadian and we're honest, we're also fiercely competitive, yeah, I think there were moments in that process where everybody was just shocked, and speaking to executive chairmen and CEOs of these companies, and really having to get them to move was definitely a David versus Goliath story. So.
And it shows that I think often for real innovation, you need to have the combination of both the David and the Goliath, right? And so you have to know when it is time to go out into the market and make a change, but also have the prep. I mean, you guys were incredibly prepared as an organization, right? Your diligence, your process.
Yeah, even though I would say it was an unprecedented in my view, and also from your view and from our U.S. Council's view, in terms of going from term sheet with 3 to parallel definitive negotiations and completing a deal in 6 months, even though that was a precedented sort of timeline. I remember with our U.S. Council saying, this is when we're going to close, and you're crazy, and we pushed them to get it. But the only reason we were able to do that was we were just really well prepared. So even though I say, like, we presented this data last summer, and it led to all of this, of course we've been building relationships for years, and not necessarily asking to partner at that point in time. We weren't open for business at that time. This was our lead proprietary program, and we were asking essentially for input and feedback and building relationships and rapport with these companies. And when we felt we needed to switch gears, that's when we did it. But we had a lot of these existing relationships, and people trusted us that these guys know what they're doing, and they're credible. And so yeah, it would be very hard to go in cold and expect to get anything, unless there was an exceptional circumstance.
So one thing I think is a good lesson for people listening that are entrepreneurs and founders, and I think, again, going back to your strategic nature, preparation and building long-term vision, and being slow, not slow as in not working hard or not advancing things quickly, but being deliberate in how you're proceeding on a path. But then when you go to execute on an opportunity, whether it's a commercial deal or a financing, or even hiring a key executive, executing very quickly. And one thing you're really good at is you set a goal, and so when Tamara says we're closing our financing by December 24th, it's going to happen, and you sort of have to execute quickly. And in this climate, we're definitely seeing that pressure. So people that meander, or people that, if you're frenetic, that's not good, but once you've decided on a goal, like, executing quickly is important in today's environment because things change so rapidly. I think that's a great observation. So I wanted to ask you a few other things, and we could talk for hours, but I think the other thing that often people, especially coming out of a university environment in a lab, you're not necessarily an engineer sitting in the middle of Silicon Valley. You're sometimes removed from the world that you're going to enter on a commercial basis. how did you go about, because you're saying, you know, I'm having calls with the chairman of a global pharma, or I'm, you know, speaking to the lead VCs in the US about a round or whatever. How do you get from knowing nobody to having those relationships in that ecosystem? Is there anything you'd say to an early stage founder about the relationships you need to start with, or how to build out to figure out? And you said get out of the room, right? That's a good piece of advice, but who do you go to first, and how do you sort of build that network?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, network is one of the probably few things that you can't build in the last minute, because having a solid network, having strong, solid relationships is really built on trust, and so you have to invest in building that from a very early day, and the types of people you interact with over time will evolve. So when we were first starting the company, the early investors that invested in our company, and I see one in the back of the room there, and so they were critical to our success, because they took us under their wing, and they taught us a lot of perspectives, and I think you have to know what types of people will give you sort of that mentorship early on, and really work closely with them, and so that was essential to my success. I mean, when I took on the CEO role, I knew nothing about raising money or subscription agreement or partner or do all this kind of stuff. So working with those early angels was absolutely very critical, and those people often introduce you to others, and so you start getting sort of this sort of halo effect if you meet with solid people that can then introduce you. But always stay honest throughout that process, and people invest in people, or investors invest in people, I should say, especially at the early stage. So just be a value-based person, somebody that people like interacting with, and listen. I can't say that enough. The goal here isn't to be right at the early stage. The goal is to find what's right, and ultimately one day you will hopefully be close to being absolutely right. And I'm certainly not there yet on everything. And so yeah, I would say just know who you want to work with early on, and slowly build your network. But start early. And this is not just an entrepreneurship, but this is kind of in life in general.
So the company turns 10 next month. I think you share a birthday. You know, it's been a 10-year journey. You've seen a lot of different macro climates. You've seen some insane times in the financing world, and a change in regenerative medicine and personalized health, and all sorts of new categories and convergence. And what's your view today? Because obviously for a lot of folks that are in the venture space, a lot of the headlines are negative. A lot of the macro climate feels tough. What's your view, having been through a whole bunch of different environments, of where we are today? And do you think it changes how you would approach trying to build a company at scale that's going to solve a global problem? I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. So how do you think about where you are today in the macro environment we're in?
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand the world that you're trying to operate in, and I mean, every business is different, but generally speaking, it is of course a very difficult time right now, and different businesses are feeling it in different ways, and so you have to be sort of, I would say, reflective of the environment that you're in, and there's no shame in having to retreat. There's no shame in having to, if you're a company in a situation that needs to downsize. I think the most important thing is treating people with respect and empathy, and staying true to the mission. And that's what entrepreneurship is all about, and being resilient and living to fight another day. So while it is difficult, the long-term view will always be in favor of entrepreneurship and innovators, and as long as you take that long-term view and have a way to get there, and even if it means the worst of the worst, which is things don't work out, it isn't also the end of the world. You'll take valuable experiences, and the way you treat people is what will survive, and so treat people well, and there could be another opportunity. So I think always put things into perspective, and stay course with the long term, and I remain sort of strong in my belief that the long term is always going to be in favor of people who are wanting to do good in the world, and there's going to always be more good than bad, and innovation is, in my view, the best of the best of the best in terms of what we could do in the world.
Okay, thanks, Sammer. So I failed in my first job, which was to monitor the time appropriately, and now I think we have, for the time left, we're going to take some questions. I had a lot of other questions for you, but like I said, I think we'll turn it over to the audience. So looking at the slide of questions, we've talked about some of these. I'll find lots of great questions. This is an interesting one. So especially in the early days, there was a question of what's your advice for balancing the sometimes conflicting opinions from the variety of advisors and board members you work with? And maybe just touch on the board, because you've used your board masterfully to add value to your business at different stages.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very important question, because as much as I say, of course, early stage, you need to build your network and talk to a lot of people, you're going to get a lot of advice. So you're going to have to very quickly develop a way of processing all of this advice. And sometimes, actually many times, advice that you get is not accurate. And you understand your business fundamentals the best, and over time you'll understand it more and more. And so you have to listen and develop this kind of processing capability of being able to listen and to carefully consider the feedback and implement it if it makes sense. But if it doesn't make any sense, you have to also have a firm belief in going another way, and being, I would say, bold enough to stand up against whoever is giving you advice that you don't think is appropriate. So I think that's also very, very important. Don't be that person that listens to everything and anything that somebody mentions. If we would have done that, we would have been a company that prints food and sells printer. Like, everybody has a certain view of what you should do, and you need to know what you want to do and get the advice that you think you need to advance the mission.
So, and one thing just to touch on, because I think it's important, is you went out to build a board with external expertise before financing required you to do that. Yeah,
so I mean, boards are absolutely critical, and have to use it kind of effectively, and your board should evolve. So our board has evolved over time, and particularly as we shifted from becoming a platform company to a company that's applying its platform to create tissue therapeutics, or essentially medicines for people. We had to, of course, bring on people who had that expertise. So we brought world-class people from outside of our ecosystem, because we felt we didn't have that skill set here. That's something that we're aspiring to get to in our ecosystem, but we went global, and we brought people that are giving us real input on how to influence the direction here in a positive way. So boards should evolve, and you should have people on the board that are important to the problems of the day.
Okay, so another question says, what's the next problem aspect is looking to solve? Now, I acknowledge you haven't solved diabetes yet, but you're on the way. What's the next problem you're looking to solve?
Yeah, so we have a platform technology, and that's of course a challenge, because we are always thinking of how do we stay focused and what opportunities are next, but that's also of course the opportunity. We have a lot of optionality, and so a big area that we're focusing on now is liver, creating liver tissues for a variety of different acquired and congenital liver diseases, with first INDs planned over the next couple of years that will be bringing to first-in-human trials. So focusing on metabolic and endocrine type diseases is a big focus for us, in addition, of course, to our focus on diabetes and obesity with our partners Novo Nordisk.
Okay, another question, and we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but what were 2 to 3, say, specific factors that contributed to your collective decision-making process to move from thinking about a startup to pulling the trigger on aspect? So what was it that made you take the lead?
In terms of starting the company?
Yeah, a couple specific things.
Yeah, I mean, UBC actually, we're super thankful for the platform that they provided. The same year that we were thinking of starting a company, UBC actually was getting going and created something called Lead Launchpad Academy, and that's where we participated in this academy over several weeks and had to sort of refine our thinking, and that was super helpful. So it was at that time that we felt that, all right, well, I think we could do this. So we might as well go with it. And again, I can't say this enough, but you almost don't want to know how hard it is. You don't want to know how, like, there are just tough moments. There are moments where, you're going to feel all alone in this world, and you're going to like want to cry. And so having the right support structure, and not just from the founders, but also your family, and have an extremely supportive wife and awesome kids, and you need to know how to sort of think of the big picture. But yeah, it was UC played a catalytic moment for us in terms of starting the company.
And for anyone that thinks it's easy, it's been 10 years. You had no children when we started, and I didn't have any gray hair. So and you're not anywhere near done yet, right? So it's definitely not an overnight process. To the extent you can answer this one, going back to the Novo deal for a minute, and you can answer it, and I think I know the answer, but I'll ask it. What was the hardest due diligence question or ask that you faced during negotiations with Novo? And I think you can think about this even more broadly, which is when you're doing a collaboration with a global business at scale, like, what is that due diligence pressure point? What's the hardest thing?
Yeah, I mean, in particular in this process, what was extremely hard was it was a competitive process with 3 people that are fierce competitors, and we knew we could only partner with one, because of course it's an exclusive deal in diabetes and obesity, and so it was a delicate dance of sharing enough, but of course not sharing everything, because we knew that 2 of the 3 are going to also, the day after the deal is announced, are going to come at us in terms of competing against us. So it was a uniquely sort of delicate process, and so that called for just a lot of, I would say, strategy and thinking about what do we share and when do we share it and how do we sort of triage it, and so just being super organized, and I'm sure many of the partners were frustrated at a point in time, because we were, of course, it's very unusual actually for 3 pharmas to go into definitive negotiations. Usually they'll get you to commit to that decision at the term sheet stage before they invest millions of dollars in legal fees and time, and so so we were unique in that situation, but I'm sure there were many times where they were frustrated, well, why isn't he partnering with us, kind of thing. And so so that was challenging, and diligence is always a mix of an art and science, and so you have to know what to share and how to share it, when to share it, but always staying true and honest and credible and data-driven and scientifically driven and mission-driven and value-based is very important.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that last part, because I think there's a temptation when you're asked hard questions and you're trying to be strategic to not want to have to answer them, or to maybe bend a little bit your answer to be optimized. But I think being honest about your responses is super important, and so that obviously, and that's something you guys did very well. And sometimes that means just telling the partner you're not willing to discuss that issue, and knowing that it might be challenging. But
and I would say, just on the note of diligence, one of the biggest challenges is, of course, doing your reverse diligence, which is something you should always be doing with, whether it's an investor or a partner, and so that's, of course, that was a big effort, and of course difficult, because a lot of these companies don't like sharing confidential information, but for us it was extremely important to learn more about their plans and learn more about their cells and learn more about all this stuff. So that was also a challenging process that we had to manage on the reverse diligence side.
Okay, thanks, Tamara. So I'm gonna recognize the person who's putting all the effort into getting their question up to the top of the list here. What's the best advice you have for a second-year biotech student? I'm not gonna ask who asked the question because it's anonymous. What's your best advice?
Best advice would be, I mean, at that stage you should also start to be thinking about your network and try to make yourself feel a bit uncomfortable by interacting with others outside of your sphere, and so if there are any sort of joint initiatives with the business school, the SAR school, or programs like New Ventures, that type of thing, I think that those types of things will open up your mind. So don't get caught in sort of a situation where your head's down thinking about the next midterm. Midterm will come and go, but the interactions and experience that you gain here at UBC and interact with others will be life-changing. Of course, you need to pass the midterm too, otherwise you're not going. Well, and so focus on academics, of course, and learn. And it's fantastic that we have a bioengineering department here, and Peter is doing a great job with that. And I think everybody here is lucky to have it. At the time we didn't have a biomedical school, so that's fantastic news for UBC.
So this is an interesting one too, and so the question is, did the company have to pivot at any point? If so, how difficult was making that decision to pivot? And obviously, you didn't pivot in the way that some companies do, where you weren't Slack that started as a video game or whatever the case might be, but you did have some pivots in your strategy. So you want to talk about a couple of the key ones?
Yeah, I would say any platform company that could go in a million different directions should always be evolving, and so that's just something that we've always been thinking of. I mean, if you look at Aspect as a company, there's so many different versions of the company that we could create. We could sell instruments, we could provide services to pharma, or we could use our technology to print tissues, and those tissues would be transplanted to the body. And so we were really excited about the latter part and that mission, but we didn't start there. So we had a moonshot, but early days we actually did a lot of sort of service type things with pharma, and that was kind of the business model to sort of learn and survive to fight another day. And then when we accumulated enough knowledge and we thought we could take on bolder challenges, we essentially evolved into a vertically integrated therapeutics company.
And some of the companies in the space that were early and listed and had big market caps had different strategies, and it was probably tempting to think, well, we're just going to do what they did because it's been successful. But I think it was important that you were, had your own vision.
Totally, and innovation isn't just on science and engineering. Innovation always has to be on the strategy side of things, and so that's also something I really enjoy, and our team is really focused on, is how do we always look at value creation and maximizing that value, and that's what took us to where we're at today in terms of really maximizing the potential of our technology and bringing this to patients is what we're excited about.
So this is not on Slido, but I want to ask. So the theme of this week, like we talked about, it's climate change, it's human health, and these massive problems that the world is facing. How do you think that universities are they uniquely positioned to create innovation in companies that can solve these challenges? What are the benefits? What are some of the challenges of coming from that background? And obviously you've talked about UBC and Sean and Michelle, the good work they do as an organization. But what is it about a university that you think is important for this kind of innovation?
Yeah, again, universities, particularly world-class ones like UBC, are in such a unique position. And that also comes with a huge responsibility. Like, there's amazing innovation. Billions of dollars over years are put into some of the riskiest types of innovation, and a lot of that, or I shouldn't say a lot, some of that is actually really commercially applicable and able to tackle some of these big challenges. So there's in my view, there's several multi-billion-dollar anchor companies yet to be born, and will be born out of UBC and we could play a role in making sure that happens. And I think it's going to require all hands on deck kind of perspective, from the people controlling IP at UBC to controlling seed funding to all the way up to the president. And so, and ultimately the people here and the scientists and engineers that are going to be behind these great ideas. And so, yeah, universities are uniquely positioned given the virtue and the goals of the university to focus on basic research and translational research that is a foundation of these companies like Accelera and Aspect and Precision and even in other ecosystems like Moderna and others. So I think there's a huge unique opportunity, but also it's not going to come for free. It's not going to come it can't be by accident. It has to be a concerted effort, a aligned effort from all bodies of the university to ensure, and I think UBC in particular is in a unique position given the quality that we have here and the drive of many of our researchers. So there's a lot of untapped potential, and I'm excited to see more and more coming out over the next few decades.
Yeah, and just to, I mean, the shout out to UBC, 2010 when I first started speaking with professors out here, they had great history and legacy with the New Venture Design Program and other things being done in the academic space, but there was no EAEBC, it was nascent, right, and there was no CDL, and there was like the connectivity between the university and the larger venture ecosystem has, I think, been improved by leaps and bounds over the last 10, 15 years. They've done a really good job from that perspective.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's a lot more a lot more that could be done. But I think we're at the early stages of being able to say that we're certainly creating an engine of multi-billion-dollar company creation.
Okay, so last question, Tamara, and I'll go back to Slido for a minute. One thing that I know, and you've talked about today, but it's been important to your development, is mentorship. So how many, you have lots of mentors, but can you just maybe tell us a couple of key mentor relationships, and what are some of the things you've learned, if you can be specific?
First I should say our relationship, and Justin actually, before we started a company, we were of course looking at what corporate legal counsel do we need, and I remember kind of our first meeting in downtown where we'll set you up with all this stuff, and I left that meeting thinking I could do all of this kind of stuff. But what are these? They're going to charge us $500 an hour to do it. But of course that's the wrong way to think, because it goes back to being prepared to be a globally relevant company that does globally kind of impactful deals. You really need that, and so I've learned a lot from of course close relationships with people like Justin, those early investors. One that is still on the board, and it was the first check into the company, Chris Bissonette. He wrote me $1 million check on his balcony after a 2-hour grilling that I thought went really, really bad. And so he's been a fantastic friend, and then these relationships span more than just business, and so we're often on fishing trips and talking about kind of our families and that type of thing. So at some point, some of the lines start to blur, and you really appreciate that if you surround yourselves with good people, good things will come. And so, I'm indebted to a lot of people that have contributed to where we're at now, and we're just getting started. There's so much more for us to do, and in my view, if we don't get this to patients, and if we don't build a $100 billion company over the next period of time here, we haven't achieved what we're looking to achieve.
Well, that's a great note to end it on, and we're all looking forward to seeing it happen. So thanks a lot, Tamara. Appreciate it.
Hello. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Tamara and Justin. Was that amazing or what? Let's give them another round of applause. We definitely have no shortage of awesome people around our community to share these really amazing stories. And Justin, you did a phenomenal job in moderating. And Tamara, you always leave us with so much to think about. And I think for me, what stands out is just the importance of the relationships that you build and take the time. It always feels like building a startup that you need to be at the end already. And I mean, it's gonna be a journey no matter what. And so the more you invest in the people around you and really taking counsel where it makes sense to take counsel and doing the work, then you're going to be sort of moving forward like great companies like Aspect. So thank you so much for that. Okay, we're going to take a networking break for about 15 minutes, and we're going to continue back downstairs in the UBC co-working space. Our keynotes we knew were going to be largely attended, so we wanted to give a little bit more room, but now we're going to go back downstairs. Our next session is a workshop on policy communications. Yesterday, we had an awesome storytelling session that was really rooted in impact. This is about communicating your story to government or policymakers. And so for those of you that are thinking about some larger conversations that you're keen to have, this is going to be a great workshop in how to put together a communications plan. See you downstairs. Thank you.